4 specific claims, typed into a comment section. Platform not logged, handle not attached to any recoverable profile, and they drew roughly 773 engagements, making it one of the highest response pieces of audience interaction a Horus Heresy lore channel had generated. Garviel Loken survived the massacre at Isstvan III. Vulkan, Primarch of the Salamanders, was a perpetual, functionally unkillable. Magnus the Red had a psychic shard embedded in the founding of the Grey Knights chapter, and the entity the Mechanicum had built their entire civilization around for 10,000 years, the sleeping god beneath the Martian rock, was a Catan, specifically the Void Dragon. The commenters said they had worked for Games Workshop Canada during the early Horus Heresy Games Day events. Dan Abnett's Horus Rising went on sale in April 2006. Games Day Canada ran from 1999 through 2009. That window placed the commenter inside the organization during the first 4 years of a series that would eventually stretch to 54 main novels, 24 novellas, 47 audio dramas, and over 19 different authors. A publishing project running for 18 years. Every single one of those 4 claims later appeared in Black Library canon. Not as soft readings of ambiguous prose, not as fan-favorable interpretations of narrative subtext, as confirmed, in-universe facts written into the main sequence of the Horus Heresy series by named authors in identifiable novels on verifiable publication dates. Then the comment kept going. After the 4 predictions came a 5th claim. A controlled access document existed, held by Dan Abnett and Laurie Goulding, Black Library's Horus Heresy series editor, a working record of what the Horus Heresy universe was going to be. Entries that determined which author was permitted to know what, and when any secret was allowed to surface in published fiction. The document, the commenter said, still contained unrevealed entries, named specifically the true allegiance of the Alpha Legion and the real nature of the Golden Throne. The comment text in its complete form isn't recoverable from available sources. The handle, the platform, the full untruncated original, all absent. That constraint lives in the case file from the beginning. What the constraint can't do is erase 4 predictions that can each be checked against the actual publication record, title by title and date by date. A confirmed track record of advanced knowledge is the only argument this script can make with full confidence, which means going through the predictions one at a time and being honest about what each one shows. Not all 4 are equal. That's where to start. Garviel Loken is the protagonist of Horus Rising, the novel that opened the series, that established the emotional architecture everything else would build on. He's the loyal captain in Horus's Mournival, a senior Luna Wolves officer whose function is to serve as the reader's ground-level witness to the War Master's corruption and the Imperium's unraveling. Abnett makes Loken the most human figure in the early books. He's skeptical of the forces gathering around Horus. He argues against them, internally, then externally, then to anyone who will listen, then to nobody, because nobody is left to listen. By the 3rd novel, Ben counters Galaxy in Flames, Loken and a remnant of faithful legionaries have been stranded on the surface of Isstvan III, while the traitor legions execute the atrocity that begins the Horus Heresy in earnest. Virus bombs fall from the fleet above. Legionaries who served alongside Loken for decades, men who knew him, trained beside him, followed him into war across the Great Crusade, are betrayed, incinerated, or cut down by their own brothers on the surface below. The traitor ships hold position above the atmosphere, ensuring nothing loyal survives. Then the World Eaters and Emperor's children descend into the ruin, not to secure it, but to slaughter what the bombs left behind. In narrative terms, Galaxy in Flames functions as Loken's eulogy. He is the good soldier who saw the betrayal clearly, who refused to rationalize it, who paid for that clarity with abandonment. Every chapter of the first 3 books had been building a character for that ending. He survived. The commenter claimed knowledge of this between 2006 and 2009, during the Games Day Canada events when the early series was still finding its shape. The in-print confirmation arrived in Book 29 of the main series, Graham McNeil's Vengeful Spirit, published May 3rd, 2014, 8 years after Horus Rising. That's where Loken resurfaces in the main novel sequence, a feral survivor of Isstvan's ruins, having spent years in a broken mental state on the virus-bombed planet's surface, eventually found by Nathaniel Garrow and recruited into Malkador the Sigillite's Knights Errant, a covert force operating outside the normal chain of command, gathering individuals the Regent believed would be needed for what came after. The Garrow audio drama series threaded elements of Loken's survival across multiple earlier installments, building the bridge piece by piece outside the main novel sequence. Vengeful Spirit is the main sequence novel confirmation. By then, the gap between the insider's claimed knowledge window and the in-print payoff was somewhere between 5 and 8 years, depending on which specific Games Day event was the source. The Mechanicum entry for Garviel Loken records his eventual death differently, stabbed by Erebus during the final days of the Heresy, well past the Isstvan III massacre, deep into the endgame of the entire series. He survived the planet that should have been his grave, lived long enough to reach the very end of the war, and died on his own terms in a final confrontation. For a reader encountering only the first 3 novels, none of that was visible. The character appeared finished. The commenter said otherwise. Vulkan accumulated a body count across multiple Horus Heresy novels that should, by any consistent set of narrative rules, have permanently ended him. Nick Kime's novels document what amounts to a sustained exercise in killing the same Primarch and watching him return. Stabbed, executed, tortured across multiple extended sequences, apparently dead on multiple occasions, and then not. The Salamanders Primarch becomes, across Kime's books, the figure the narrative keeps trying and failing to permanently remove. Vulkan Lives, Book 26 of the main series, published in December 2013, is the novel where the series formalizes the explanation. Vulkan is a perpetual. The capacity to die and return isn't a continuity error being corrected. It's a specific, confirmed property of a defined category of individuals in the Horus Heresy universe. The perpetual concept is shared across a small group of figures: Old Person, the ancient soldier who threads through multiple novels spanning millennia; John Grammaticus, the Cabal operative whose long life defines his entire purpose in the story; and others, and it becomes one of the structural cornerstones of the heresy's latter cosmology. Retroactively, it explains what readers had been watching happen to Vulkan in earlier books. Not authorial inconsistency, but a property being demonstrated before it was named. The Dramatis Personae of the End and the Death, Volume 1, published February 2023, lists Vulkan among the loyalist Primarchs at the Siege of Terra with one identifier: the Last Guardian, present at the moment the Emperor is entombed. The perpetual who couldn't be killed, outlasting the war itself, still standing when everything resolved. For a reader in 2006, being told that the Salamanders Primarch would be confirmed as unkillable, not through hand-waving, but through a formally established cosmological mechanism, would have seemed like speculation with no grounding in the early novels. The mechanism didn't appear in print until December 2013. Gap between the insider's claimed knowledge window and the in-print confirmation, 4 to 7 years. Magnus and the Grey Knights requires the most careful handling of the 4, and that carefulness is part of the case, not a weakness in it. The connection between Magnus the Red and the founding of the Grey Knights chapter isn't a pure invention of the Horus Heresy novel series. It has roots in the much older Games Workshop background material. The Grey Knights were first introduced in the Rogue Trader era, and early supplementary books like Realm of Chaos, Slaves to Darkness contained foundational material about the chapter's origins. So an informed Games Workshop employee in 2006 could plausibly know something about that connection simply from reading older Codex lore, without access to anything the novel series was planning. What Goonhammer's Grey Knights lore documentation confirms is the specific canonical form the connection takes in the Horus Heresy framework. A psychic shard of Magnus named Ionius became the first Supreme Grand Master of the Grey Knights. Not just a thematic association or a vague paralleling of Magnus's fall with the chapter's founding. A literal piece of Magnus, preserved and seeded into the chapter's inception. Graham McNeil's 1,000 Suns, Book 12 of the main series, published in 2010, addressed Magnus extensively and deepened the canonical picture of his role and fate. For a commenter in 2006 to frame the Magnus Grey Knights connection specifically as a coming in-series confirmation, as something the novel series was building toward, rather than simply background lore the Codex had always contained, would suggest access to how the creative team intended to develop and formalize that relationship. That's a distinction worth making, even if it can't be precisely proven from outside. The claim wasn't, "I read some old Codex material." It was that this would be a confirmed revelation in the novel series. The pre-existing lore base makes this the most susceptible of the four to the knowledgeable reader extrapolating from available material interpretation. Of the four predictions, this one carries the weakest evidentiary case for advanced knowledge specifically about what the Heresy novel series was planning, and the script places it third in the credibility argument for that reason. Graham McNeil's Mechanicum, Book 9 in the main Horus Heresy series, was published in 2008. Its narrative establishes that the sleeping entity beneath the Martian rock, the creature the Mechanicum's entire civilization had been unconsciously orbiting and revering for 10,000 years, building their greatest works above what they called the dragon's resting place, is a Catan. One of the ancient star gods, imprisoned by the Emperor during the distant prehistory of the setting. McNeil confirmed publicly after publication that the dragon in Mechanicum was the Void Dragon specifically, a cosmic entity whose imprisonment in Mars represents one of the Emperor's most consequential and secretive acts, with implications that extend through the entire 40K timeline. Gamesday Canada ran from 1999 through 2009. Mechanicum published in 2008. A commenter at Gamesday 2008 or 2009 could have read the novel before attending the event. Even placing the insider's claimed knowledge at the earliest Horus Heresy era Gamesday in 2006 or 2007, the maximum gap between claimed foreknowledge and in-print confirmation for this specific prediction is approximately 2 years. Not 8, not 5, potentially less. That's the honest accounting. 3 predictions carry multi-year gaps that are genuinely difficult to explain without some form of insider access to the project's planned direction. The Dragon prediction doesn't carry that kind of gap. Either it reflects information circulating in pre-publication discussions in 2006 or 2007, or it reflects a shorter window of insider knowledge than the other 3. Or it's the kind of informed speculation a well-positioned Gamesday employee could arrive at from available material. All 3 readings are plausible. The script doesn't dismiss the Dragon prediction. It assigns it the appropriate weight relative to the others and moves on. Managing a 54-novel shared universe across 18 years, with plot revelations that needed to arrive in a specific sequence because arriving out of sequence would collapse the dramatic architecture of a decades-long project. That doesn't happen through individual goodwill and careful memory. Some coordination mechanism existed. This isn't a claim, it's a structural observation. Abnett confirmed the mechanism's existence. In a 2012 Bell of Lost Souls interview, he described quarterly face-to-face summits among the core Horus Heresy authors. Authors sitting in the same room 4 times a year, planning what the series was going to do. In a 2017 Track of Words interview, he described the original formation meeting, the gathering where the direction was set, the round table structure through which the project was jointly built. He was specific about the inception. This is what we want to do. You're the guys who are going to write it. It's not going to be one person writing it. It's going to be a team effort. In another interview discussing the series, there is a collaborative effort to the planning and development. These are confirmed statements on the record from the person who opened the series in 2006 and closed it with the end and the death in 2023 and 2024. Those meetings eventually stopped. The cessation came from policy decisions at Games Workshop, Abnett's 2017 phrasing. The effect was that the authors were, in his words, quite disaffected. That detail cuts in two directions simultaneously. On one side, the meetings were real, productive enough to be disruptive by their absence, and constituted genuine structural coordination among the writers building the series together. On the other, they ended. A continuously maintained, controlled access written document would suggest increasing formalization over time. The picture Abnett describes is the opposite, a structured coordination system that became less formal as the series progressed, not more. If a formal document with tiered access entries had been the primary mechanism, ending the in-person meetings would have been a smaller structural risk than his phrasing implies it was. Laurie Goulding held series editorial authority at Black Library for the Horus Heresy from the project's early years through approximately 2016. His editorial credit appears on 8 anthology volumes across the main series. Mark of Calth at position 25 in the sequence, Legacies of Betrayal at 31, War Without End at 33, Eye of Terra at 35, The Silent War at 37, Shattered Legions at 43, The Burden of Loyalty at 48, and Heralds of the Siege at 52. 8 of the 54 main series entries, all anthologies, spanning the mid-series through the final quarter. A December 2016 Track of Words interview describes him as having been a crucial part of the Horus Heresy team at Black Library, with that role about to change. He departed the position around that period, with The Burden of Loyalty confirmed as his final Horus Heresy anthology in the series editor role. 12 years, 8 anthology volumes, oversight of the most creatively sensitive phase of the series, the period when the story's biggest structural secrets were being sequenced and released into print, one carefully timed novel at a time. Whatever mechanism existed for managing what each author knew, Goulding was inside it throughout that entire period. A community Reddit thread asked the question directly, whether Black Library authors work from a secret lore document. The top response? There's no show Bible. Every author and freelancer is different. It's practically impossible to get a default read on how it works. The authority behind that response is unknown. It could be someone with genuine knowledge of Black Library's editorial process. It could be a well-read community member working from reasonable inference. It's the most direct denial in the available public record. It belongs in the case file alongside the confirmation that structured planning definitely existed. No recovered statement from Abnett or Goulding uses the language of lore Bible, master document, or controlled access. Both confirmed the roles. Both confirmed the collaboration. Neither confirmed the document's form. That's the honest picture. The planning infrastructure existed and produced results across 18 years, managed by the two people the insider names, without any public confirmation of whether that infrastructure took the form of a maintained written record or distributed institutional knowledge exercised through editorial authority and in-person coordination. The strongest single piece of physical evidence in this case file isn't the comment with 773 engagements. It's a line in a back matter document that Black Library printed themselves. Dan Abnett published Pariah on October 1st, 2012, hardcover, ISBN 978-184-970-2010, UK edition. First volume of the Bequin trilogy. the intended culmination of the Eisenhorn and Ravenor cycles, a creative arc Abnett had been building through two separate trilogies since the late 1990s. 6 novels, 2 trilogies, one overarching story about the Inquisition's hidden wars and the figures who fight them. Gregor Eisenhorn, Gideon Ravenor, and now Elizabeth Bequin, the pariah at the center of everything. The product description for Pariah places Bequin as caught between Inquisitors Gregor Eisenhorn and Gideon Ravenor, former allies now enemies who are playing a shadow game against a mysterious and deadly foe. The Bequin trilogy was described as the culmination of the entire cycle, the third and final movement of a saga that had been running for over a decade. Inside the Black Library PDF excerpt, distributed with the original edition of Pariah, in the back matter advertising section, listing upcoming titles in the same series, one line appeared. Book 2, Penitent, 2014. Not coming soon, not to be announced. A specific year. The kind of projected release date a publisher puts in promotional material when the schedule is considered settled enough to print inside the book itself. Penitent was published February 27, 2021 in its Black Library ebook edition. The Simon & Schuster print edition appeared May 10, 2022. The gap from October 2012 to February 2021 is approximately 8 years and 4 months. Abnett himself described it as 9 years in a Track of Words rapid-fire interview published February 20, 2021. The same month Penitent finally appeared. His exact words? "It's been 9 years since the first book in the series, Pariah." He named the gap. He didn't explain it in that exchange, and the interview didn't press him for one. The documented projection said 2014. The actual publication arrived in 2021. That is a 7-year slip from the date Black Library printed in their own promotional material. Not a slight delay, not a year or two of the kind of schedule slippage common across any large publishing operation. 7 years from a date that was specific enough to appear in the back of the book? The alternative explanations deserve genuine consideration because the editorial gatekeeping interpretation isn't the only available explanation and shouldn't be treated as though it's. Abnett's contracted workload during the 2012 to 2021 period was substantial by any measure. No Fear, the Battle of Calth novel, published in 2012, the same year as Pariah. The Unremembered Empire, Book 27 of the main Heresy series, appeared in 2013. Saturnine, the fourth Siege of Terra novel, required completion. These are major works demanding sustained concentration, not minor projects that could be completed in parallel with a separate trilogy. Community discussions reference a health event in 2016 as a possible contributing factor, but no primary source has confirmed this publicly, and no statement from Abnett attributes the Penitent delay to health in available material. Workload is a documented reality. Health is an unconfirmed possibility. Both can be true simultaneously, and neither requires a gatekeeping explanation to produce a 7-year slip. What the publication record shows, independent of cause, is this. A projected date appeared in print inside the original edition of Pariah. The book didn't publish until 7 years after that date. Abnett himself characterized the total gap as 9 years, and no public explanation for that gap has been offered. The timing has a geometrical alignment worth noting without overstating. The Horus Heresy main sequence concluded in February 2019 with James Swallow's The Buried Dagger, Book 54, the formal end of the main sequence after 13 years. Penitent arrived in February 2021, 2 years after the main sequence concluded and 2 years before the end and the death. The Bequin trilogy is set in M41, approximately 5 centuries after the heresy, which means it carries potential implications about the long aftermath of the war. If editorial reasoning had been part of the delay calculation, one version of that reasoning would note that a novel set 5 centuries after the heresy, dealing with the long-term consequences of the Inquisition and its hidden wars, might warrant waiting until the heresy itself had been formally resolved in the main sequence. That version of the reasoning is consistent with the published timeline. It isn't proven by it. Pandemonium, the third Bequin novel, remains undelivered. Abnett confirmed the delay, as documented by content creator CM Valrek's published account of the situation. A Reddit thread on the Black Library community titled, "GW, Give Us Pandemonium Already," is an active document of reader frustration extending into 2024 and 2025. Bolter and Chainsword forum discussions specifically raised editorial concerns about Pandemonium's placement relative to the advancing canonical 40K timeline around the year 500 M41, noting that Games Workshop has been careful since the Dark Imperium books advanced the 40K present about publications that interact with that moving canonical boundary. An explicit editorial timing concern is visible in community discussion, connected directly to Pandemonium's continued absence. That's a real editorial mechanism, named by readers who are tracking the same pattern. The Pariah Sequence, documented projection for 2014, publication in 2021. 9 years named by the author himself, no explanation given. Pandemonium, confirmed delay, editorial timeline concerns raised in community discussion, no publication date announced. If the same reasoning is operating across both sequels, readers are somewhere in the middle of the second iteration of the same pattern. The author testimony layer requires honest characterization because it's the thinnest part of the evidentiary case, and padding thin evidence with confident prose would be a specific kind of dishonesty the audience for this series will immediately identify. For the insider's claim about tiered, controlled access to lore secrets to rise from plausible to demonstrable, the strongest corroboration would come from the authors themselves, moments where they described being told something had to wait, discovering that another author's version of a shared character operated from specifications different from their own, or being given information in a deliberate sequence rather than all at once. Panel recordings, extended interviews, Reddit AMAs, podcast appearances. The community has generated a substantial archive of author conversations over the course of the series' run. Community discussion from 2024 references Abnett and Graham McNeil having spoken publicly about the writer's room they had for the Horus Heresy and the process it involved. The specific account truncates before the relevant detail survives, so what they actually described about that process isn't recoverable from available material. A comment attributed to Aaron Dembski-Bowden circulated in community discussions, noting that the version of Conrad Kurz in Abnett's The Unremembered Empire was capable of things his Kurz could never do, suggesting that different authors were working from different specifications for the same character's capabilities. That observation is consistent with a tiered information model. It's also consistent with 19-plus authors interpreting the same fictional figures across 2 decades without identical reference material. The 2 readings aren't mutually exclusive, and neither firmly eliminates the other. No direct statement from any named Horus Heresy author has been recovered describing specific restricted access to lore secrets, a clearance structure for plot information, or a specific moment where editorial direction required holding a particular element until a later publication. That absence is a genuine gap in the case, not a detail to skip past quickly. It doesn't prove the structure didn't exist. Coordination obviously existed. Abnett confirmed it. The specific form of that coordination and whether it included formalized access restrictions is what the author testimony layer can't confirm. The script says so directly, because the audience for this series will notice if it doesn't. 2 entries from the insider's claimed list of unrevealed document contents remain, by everything available in the public record, without canonical resolution in the published fiction. Dan Abnett's Legion, Book 7 of the main series, published in 2008, is the founding text of the Alpha Legion question. The 20th Legion arrived at the Horus Heresy with the most deliberately constructed ambiguity in the entire project. Their Primarchs are Alpharius and Omegon, twin commanders presenting identical faces to a universe that couldn't tell them apart and increasingly couldn't determine whether that confusion was coincidence or weapon. Their long-term motivation, their ultimate allegiance to chaos or to the Emperor's cause, or to something that can't be cleanly categorized as either, and even the basic question of how many Primarchs the Legion actually had, all of it left unresolved when the novel ends. The narrative doesn't forget to answer. It declines to answer. The ambiguity is the point of the text. 60-plus main series novels followed Legion. The full Siege of Terra subseries followed those. Abnett wrote the 3-volume conclusion of the entire Horus Heresy. The Alpha Legion's ultimate allegiance has no canonical answer across all of that. The Alpharius, head of the Hydra novella from the Primarch's line, addressed Alpharius directly in a dedicated single-character story, and community consensus, consistent across discussions and fan analyses, holds that even this direct treatment maintained rather than resolved the central ambiguity. A formal, definitive canonical statement about whether the Alpha Legion ultimately served Chaos or the Emperor isn't present in any identified Black Library publication since 2008. Abnett, who built the question into the series' foundation, has offered deliberate non-answers when pressed publicly. A writer who constructed the mystery 17 years ago, who then wrote the formal conclusion of the entire Horus Heresy, had every opportunity to resolve it within the end and the death. He didn't. That sustained irresolution across a series otherwise meticulous about closing its major narrative threads. Loken's fate resolved. Vulkan's nature explained. The Emperor's sacrifice dramatized across 3 volumes isn't an oversight in a 60-plus novel project. An oversight doesn't survive 17 years and the writer of the original mystery authoring the finale. It's a maintained position. Whether that position reflects an entry still being held for a specific future release, or a creative decision made long ago that the Alpha Legion's ambiguity is a permanent feature rather than a deferred answer, isn't determinable from outside the editorial structure. The outcome for readers in either case is the same. Legion's question exists, the answer doesn't, and the series ended without providing one. The Golden Throne. The end and the death delivered the culminating moment 18 years of publication had been building toward. Horus dead on his throne ship. The Emperor mortally wounded, requiring immediate intervention to survive. Malcador the Sigillite, the regent of the Imperium, one of the most quietly compelling figures Abnett built across the entire series, occupied the Golden Throne during the critical hours while the Emperor was carried to it. Thousands were sacrificed to power the mechanism during that transition period. Malcador, who had spent the entirety of the Horus Heresy quietly arranging pieces across a board whose dimensions only he and the Emperor could see, was destroyed by the experience of sitting in the Emperor's place. Reduced to a handful of ash, described in community accounts of the novel as barely a remnant. The Emperor took the throne. The heresy ended. The shape of everything that comes after in the 40K timeline was set in that moment. A Goonhammer review of The End and the Death described the novel as a surprisingly hopeful book and noted that readers would now understand something specific about what the Emperor chose. The review's text cuts before capturing the specific revelation. Something about the Emperor's intentions and final action was addressed in Abnett's conclusion. What that revelation fully entails couldn't be confirmed from available sources here. What remains unresolved? The deeper nature of the throne beyond its confirmed life support function. Whether it was constructed with a purpose the heresy interrupted before it could be completed. Whether it connects to the Webway project the Emperor was pursuing when the heresy forced him back from Mars. What the Emperor's current state of consciousness constitutes inside it. What relationship the throne has to the Astronomicon, whose light guides ships through the warp across the entire 40K setting. These questions persist across fan discussion without canonical resolution from the published sources examined here. The entombment is in print. The implications of what the throne is and what the emperor is within it remain open. The insider reportedly said the lock had been taken off, that following The End and the Death and the Bequin novels' eventual completion, entries were beginning to surface. Assessing that claim requires looking at the Post-Heresy publication record honestly. The main Horus Heresy series concluded February 2019 with The Buried Dagger. The Siege of Terra launched 2 months later with John French's The Solar War in May 2019, running through 10 novels across multiple authors: French, Guy Haley, Gav Thorpe, Abnett, Chris Raitt, Aaron Dembski-Bowden, and concluding with Abnett's 3-part End in the Death through 2023 and 2024. The complete story arc of the Horus Heresy now exists in its final published form after 18 years. Whatever the creative team held in reserve to protect that arc's dramatic integrity, revelations that couldn't come early because they would have collapsed the structural tension of a project that long, the primary justification for holding them no longer applies. The Scouring era is the formal post-heresy content phase. A Warhammer community article exists titled The Scouring Timeline: How the Warhammer Studio Worked with Black Library Authors on the New Series. The title confirms that studio publisher coordination for sequencing new lore into fiction continues into the post-heresy era. Exactly the structural relationship the insider described as having always existed, now publicly characterized in Games Workshop's own language. Black Library's 2025 Book of the Year retrospective placed post-siege content prominently, describing characters scrambling to make sense of what happened. A 41st millennium aftermath period beginning to take shape in published fiction. New character-focused heresy material continued entering the publication schedule through 2025 and into 2026, including further entries in the character storyline that includes Zardu Layak, the Crimson Apostle, and similar releases. The Scouring and its immediate aftermath represent the most plausible mechanism for previously sealed entries to surface. Stories set in the decades following the heresy's conclusion are positioned to deal directly with long-term consequences. The questions that couldn't be answered during the war without destroying the tension, now potentially available for resolution as the in-universe chronology moves past the events that made them sensitive. Pandemonium remains the most direct, near-term test available. Set in M41, 5 centuries after the heresy, the third Bequin novel is chronologically the furthest from the heresy's events and the most directly positioned to carry aftermath implications. Of the Bequin trilogy's 3 books, it's the one whose delayed arrival is most conspicuous. Pariah in 2012, Penitent in 2021, Pandemonium still absent. The editorial timing concerns, raised explicitly in community discussion about its placement relative to the advancing 40K canonical present, are real concerns, documented in bolter and chainsword discussions that name the 500M41 setting as the specific pressure point. Whatever those concerns are, they are editorial timing decisions. Someone, somewhere in the Games Workshop and Black Library structure, is making a call about when that book fits into the current published continuity. That is, word for word, the mechanism the insider described. Here is what the evidence can actually support, stated at the certainty level the research permits rather than the level the argument would prefer. 3 of the 4 predictions attributed to the Games Workshop Canada commenter carry documented gaps of 4 to 8 years between the claimed insider knowledge window of 2006 to 2009 and their appearance in published Black Library canon. Loken survived Isstvan III, confirmed in Vengeful Spirit on May 3, 2014, 5 to 8 years after the claimed foreknowledge. Vulkan's perpetual nature, confirmed in Vulkan Lives in December 2013, 4 to 7 years. The Magnus Grey Knight's connection through the Ianius Shard, with a less precise gap complicated by pre-existing codex material, but confirmed as in-series canonical fact. The Dragon Beneath Mars, confirmed in Mechanicum in 2008, with a gap of 2 years at most. All 4 confirmed, 3 with substantial gaps, 1 without. An anonymous commenter whose platform and full text can't be verified described a pattern of advanced knowledge that is consistent with someone who worked inside the project during its early planning phase. Whether that access came from a formal, written document with tiered entries, from attending author planning panels where core plot directions were discussed openly among a small group, or from being present and attentive in the right environment during the right 4 years. The 4 confirmed predictions don't distinguish between those explanations. They confirm the knowledge existed. They don't confirm what delivered it. Abnett's quarterly summits are documented in his own words. Golding's decade-plus of series editorial authority across 8 anthology volumes is documented in the published record. The cessation of the round table meetings and the disaffection that resulted is documented from Abnett's own 2017 statement. The planning infrastructure was real. It became less formal over time. What it produced: managed, sequential release of lore truths across an 18-year publishing project, looks, from the outside, exactly like what a controlled access document would produce. That is bounded inference, not confirmed fact, and the distinction matters. The Alpha Legion's allegiance has no canonical answer after 60-plus novels, a dedicated Primarch's novella, and the writer of the original question authoring the series' conclusion. The deeper nature of the Golden Throne remains speculative in published sources beyond the confirmed entombment. Both are sustained, deliberate irresolutions in a series that resolved almost every other major thread it raised. Whether they are entries still being held for a specific future release, or permanent creative decisions that these questions should never have clean answers, isn't determinable from outside the room where those decisions were made. Pandemonium hasn't published. The Scouring era is early. The post-heresy content is accelerating, but hasn't surfaced the specific answers the insider named. The absence of resolution could mean the timing is still being managed. It could mean the creative decision was made long ago that certain questions simply don't get answered. From outside the editorial structure, both explanations are indistinguishable. The document may be a literal object, pages, physical or digital, held by 2 specific people and circulated carefully among a rotating cast of authors across 2 decades. It may be the accumulated institutional memory of a tightly managed creative project, expressed through editorial timing and sequencing rather than formalized paperwork. The function the insider described, controlled, sequential management of lore truth across an 18-year publishing project, is consistent with the record the books themselves leave behind. The form of that function is the part that stays unconfirmed, and what gets published next is the only thing that will change that picture. Watch what surfaces in the Scouring era. Watch Pandemonium when it eventually arrives. Watch whether the Alpha Legion's ambiguity gets definitively resolved or gets strategically deepened in ways that suggest permanent irresolution was the design all along. The publication record is the only document that's ever been publicly released. Everything else follows from reading it carefully. Subscribe for more stories like this.